Hey everyone, it's Chris, and today I'm finally doing a review of the tent that I bought almost 2 years ago, the Zpacks Altaplex. Okay, so I know it's taken me a while to get around to actually doing a review of this tent, and I know there's been a few of you asking on the channel when this is coming, so apologies for the long wait, but here it finally is, and I'll take you through the details of the tent. I'll show you how it gets set up, and I'll give you my thoughts on what I think about this after having used it for almost the last 2 years. So the reason I was originally looking around for a tent like this was basically because the tent that I own before this and still own now is the Exped Venus 2, and that's a tent which couldn't really be more different to this. It's a 2-person tent, it's designed for 4 seasons, it's double walled, and it is heavy. So that one weighs just over 3 kilos, so it's a very heavy tent to carry around, but pretty much bomb proof. As I've started doing some longer distance hikes, I didn't want to be carrying that heavier tent on those really big distances over multiple days, and I was looking around for an option that would be lighter weight to carry around, and I started having a look at some ultralight options, and eventually I landed on the Altaplex for a few reasons. One of them is because obviously it's a single person tent. It is set up with a trekking pole, so you don't actually have a set of poles for the tent, and that cuts down on the weight because I use trekking poles anyway to hike with. And it's made from Dyneema, which is very strong and also very waterproof. And this one's a single wall tent, so it only has just the main tent. There's no fly or anything that goes over the top of that, but the waterproof ability of Dyneema makes it really good for just using as a single wall tent. And the other reason was because I'd heard about this tent being really good for people that are taller, and I'm just under 6'2", and what Zpacks state on their website is that this tent suits people that are up to about 6'6". So I thought it sounded like a really good option for me, just because I knew that I'd probably have a bit of room in there and my head and my feet wouldn't be touching the ends of it. So what I really wanted to do today was just show you how this is set up, and then I'll talk to you about the features of the tent and finally what I think about it, having used it now for the last almost 2 years. So let's go and get this set up. The Altaplex tent packs down nice and small in its stuff sack, meaning you can carry it horizontally in your backpack rather than having to carry it vertically. One of the things I love about this tent is just how simple it is to set up. The most simple way I find is first to peg out the back 2 corners, and you want to get a nice straight line across the back wall. Once I've got the back 2 corners in, I'll then move around to the front with my trekking pole, and I'll get the trekking pole underneath and peg that out at the front as well. You want to make sure you get a nice vertical finish on your trekking pole once you've actually secured that guy line at the front. And finally, for the simple setup that I do, I then peg out the front 2 corners, and there's usually just one other peg that I put in, which is at the center back, which I haven't done for this one today, but a minimum of 6 is usually all that you need in conditions like today when it's very mild and benign conditions. It does have a maximum of 10 guy lines, so in windier conditions you can actually peg out all 10, and that'll just help secure your tent in windier and more unstable conditions. The final thing is then just fastening the 2 vestibule doors or storm doors to the hooks at the front, and there you have it. So I'll do a walk around now just so you can see what the tent looks like from the outside. My first thought when I saw this was that it's a very weird looking tent because it's so steep at the front and obviously then steep at the back as well. So it does actually sit up really high at the front. The trekking pole that's underneath there is sitting at about 155 centimeters. So that's a longer trekking pole than most standard ones. And if you're looking to buy this tent, you do need to have either longer trekking poles, or there's a couple of options from Zpacks where you can get an additional insert for the bottom, which gives you that additional height on your standard trekking pole. Or they do have a carbon fiber pole that you could use as an alternative as well. So that's one of probably the downsides of buying this tent, is that you do have to have that additional piece, or perhaps you have to go out and get some other trekking poles, but I'll talk about that shortly as well when I do the final review. So that's basically it from the outside. As I said, I've just done a really basic pitch on this. It's probably sitting up a little bit high at the front, and I find that each time I do pitch this, I get a slightly different result, and it really comes down to how you've got the guy ropes all adjusted and so forth. So I sometimes take a couple of shots just to get it really how I'm happy with. And the other thing is, on a windy day, it's better to actually try and have it set lower, just so you've got better protection from the wind, and it's actually going to be more stable in those more windy conditions. So as I said before, it is a Dyneema tent. It is a single wall tent as well. Dyneema is known for being extremely lightweight and very strong, and also very waterproof. So I've actually had this tent in the rain, one full night of rain on one of my trips, and it kept me perfectly dry even though it was raining for the whole night. So I was pretty happy with how it performed in that respect. One thing I should just point out here actually is where you see the Zpacks logo on this front corner, that actually shows you the side that you should face into the wind if you do have a windy day. And the reason for that is where you've got the two doors here, this door actually sits over the top of the other one. And so the idea is, if you've got the wind blowing from that direction, you're not going to get wind blowing in through the two doors, because you're facing this side of the tent into the wind, and it just means that it's a lot more resistant to being blown around when you've got windy conditions. So what I'll do now is I'll just actually open up the two front doors. I'll show you how they're secured actually. It's pretty simple. They're just on a little hook here, and that's quite easy to adjust. It just loosens off from the line lock here and comes out really easily, and then it tensions up very easily as well. So what I'll do is I'll just roll back the doors now, so you can just sort of have a look at what it looks like with the two doors open, and then we'll have a look inside. Okay, so I've just rolled back both of the vestibule doors, just so you can see what it looks like from the outside looking into it. The main door is just this big rainbow door, and that works really well. It's got a lot of room to allow you to get in and out easily. And the mesh that's on that door and that whole panel is really fine mesh, so it stops really tiny insects being able to get in. And I've found that's worked really well. I haven't had any issues with really small insects being able to get in the tent either. So very happy with how that works. The doors, when they're rolled back, they just clip into these little clips here, and that's just nice and neat. You can see, as I was saying before, how this door actually sits over the top of the other one, and this is the one that you want to have facing into the wind if it is windy. So what you can see when you look down also is that the floor looks like it's actually sitting up a little bit high at the moment. That does tend to happen a bit when you first pitch this. What happens is, once I've put my gear in there, it actually sort of sits down to the right level. So I have my sleeping mat along the front, and I'll actually show you that as well, what it looks like with gear inside and how much room there is. But once you do put that stuff in there, it actually sort of flattens the floor down. It's good to point out at this point as well that the floor is actually a really highly waterproof floor, and you really don't have to use a ground sheet for this if you don't want to. It's actually really waterproof, and most of the time that I've used this, I've just done it without any sort of ground sheet, and never had any issues with water coming into it. So I'll just now open up the door and show you inside and give you an idea of the features that are in there, and also just how it sort of fits for me in terms of the size when I'm actually lying down in it. So I'll see how we go opening the door with one hand. Sometimes it's a little bit tricky, but hopefully this is going to work. Looks like it's all right. So there's the door open. Just inside the door here, you've also got a little storage pocket, and that's where they keep the repair tape in there. So if you ever needed to patch your tent, you've got your little repair kit already there. And the other thing that I usually do is just keep something like sunglasses or maybe my head torch in there, just so I know exactly where those are, and they're easy to get to. So as I said, you can see the way that the floor sort of sits. It's a bit uneven when you're first setting it up and there's no gear in there. As I said, once you're in there, it actually evens out quite nicely. So you can see how steep the walls of the tent are, and it means that you've actually got a huge amount of height, and I can sit right up in this and be nowhere near touching the roof just because the trekking pole is so high. So really good for a tall person. Now the other thing that they've got here is these little lines in here that you can actually adjust, and that helps to basically raise the floor. So if you had a really wet night or day when you've got your tent set up, you can actually just adjust these so that it actually raises the level of the floor up, and you've got a nice deep bathtub floor then to be able to ensure that you're going to stay dry in those wet conditions. Now the other thing you can see around here, and as I said, it's not all that well set up at the moment because I haven't got this pitched out at the back, but when that's pitched out, you've got this little mesh area between the floor and the walls. And one of the things with single wall tents is that they do tend to have more issues with condensation. So the idea is this whole mesh panel that's around the floor level here, at the top of the floor level, it actually means that when you've got condensation running down the inside of the walls, it will go down and run out to the bottom of that and drip to the outside rather than actually dripping down onto your floor. I haven't been in any conditions yet where I've had really heavy condensation, so I haven't seen exactly how well that works, but things that I hear about it is that it does work really well. And that is all the way around, as you can see. So I think that's a really good design feature. So what I'll do now is I'll just jump in here and I'll give you an idea of just how much space there is for me, being a fairly tall person. So now that I'm in here, I'll just show you guys just how much space that I have as a taller person who's just under 6'2", and how long this tent is. So it's actually about 7.5 feet long, so it's got a pretty significant length. And as I was saying before, it does suit people who are up to about 6'6". So I'll just flip the camera around and show you just how much room I've got once I'm sort of lying down. So I'm now fully outstretched, and you can see where my feet are compared to where the tent wall is, and I can even raise my feet, and I've still got all of that space to fully raise my leg in the tent. So there's just plenty of room at that end. And then at the head end here, you can just sort of see, hopefully you can see behind me there, but basically I've got all that room behind me as well from the other wall, and yeah, just plenty of room for me in here. So I've got no issues with having enough space to fully lie down and make sure that I'm not touching the ends with my sleeping bag or my sleeping mat. And like I was saying before, I always sleep on the front edge here where the door is, and then my gear just goes down beside me here, and I can fit everything in here basically. So it's kind of deceptive. You sort of think a one-person tent, how much room is there actually going to be in here? But it's, yeah, really roomy, and one of the reasons I really love using this one. Now I'm going to jump out of here because it's getting really hot in the sun. Okay, so I've just got the tent set up as I would normally have it, just to give you guys an idea of how I usually set it up and the sort of space that I have in there. I have my sleeping mat and sleeping bag all set up closest to the door. That's how I usually have that set up. And on the other side there, you can see there's plenty of room for my pack and all my other gear. So at the moment I've just got another dry bag up there, as well as my food bag, and there's some other stuff inside my pack still, but you can see how much floor space there is still to actually unpack and have room to store everything. So it's really a great size for a one-person tent, and I was actually really surprised at how much room there actually is in there. So that's a full look through of the Zpacks Altaplex tent. Just a few final things. There's a few different colours you can go for in this one, and the weight does vary slightly depending on which colour you go for. I went for the spruce green, and that's slightly heavier than a couple of the other colours, just a slightly thicker Dyneema. The tent weight total for me, without any pegs in there, is 485 grams. It's advertised as 487 on Zpacks website, so my scales pretty much were the same. And if I add the weight of the pegs to that as well, I usually carry 12 pegs. You don't actually need that many for it, but I like to have the maximum number that you would need, which is 10, plus a couple of spare ones just in case I lose one or two on a hike. And that adds about roughly 120 grams to that. So it's just over a total weight of 600 grams for the whole lot. And I don't actually count the weight of poles because I'm carrying a trekking pole with me anyway when I hike, and that doesn't really contribute to the weight because it's a piece of gear that I need with me on my hikes anyway. So really lightweight tent, amazingly light to carry around, and on all the hikes that I've been on so far with it, I've been really happy with it. It's performed really well. The biggest trip that I did with it was at the end of 2020, which was the Great Southwest Walk, which was a 250 kilometre hike, and really happy with it in all conditions there. One of the only downsides that I see with the Altaplex is that you do need to have a longer trekking pole to be able to use it. And for me that wasn't really an issue because I was out looking for some new trekking poles anyway, and when I knew that I wanted to get the Altaplex, I decided to go for the Canuck poles because I knew they had that extra length in them. But if you don't have those longer poles, you do need to look at something like the additional carbon fibre tent pole or the extension that they provide to put on the bottom of your standard trekking pole, just to give you the height that you're going to need to be able to pitch it properly. Probably the only other one is these single-walled tents do tend to get condensation as an issue sometimes, and what I try and do usually is have at least one of the doors open when I'm sleeping at night. Usually if the weather conditions allow for that, I'll have either one door or both doors open, and that just helps to keep condensation down. I haven't had any nights of really heavy condensation, but it is a difference when you're looking at a single-walled tent like this compared to one that's got dual walls and deals with condensation a lot better. Apart from that, I've been really happy with it, and just a great option if you don't want to be carrying around too much weight with the tent that you're taking. And I could definitely recommend also if you're a taller person, this is the one to go for. Zpacks have actually just come out with another option just very recently, in I think the last few weeks, called the Plex Solo. And that's essentially exactly the same tent as the Altaplex, but it's slightly smaller, and it's designed for people that aren't as tall as me, I guess, more of a standard height, so in the sort of the 5 to 6 foot range. And it's just a smaller version of this, a little bit lighter as well. I think that's just under 400 grams. And that's definitely an option to look into if you didn't want to also have that longer trekking pole, because it will work with standard height trekking poles. So certainly one to look into as well. So that's it for the review of the Zpacks Altaplex. I know this review was a long time coming, and I did have quite a few subscribers asking me when I was going to actually put this video out. So finally, here it is. I hope you've found it useful, and if you are looking around for a new tent in the lightweight range or ultralight range, and perhaps a single person tent, then I would definitely recommend having a look at the Zpacks Altaplex, or its new cousin, the Plex Solo. So thanks again as always for watching, and I'll see you out on the trail next time.